So in this module, we'll begin talking about validity. We've already covered the distinction between truth and form in arguments. We've talked about soundness and validity and tried to understand that distinction. We'll try to bring some of those points together in, by looking at some examples as we go forward. So let's first note that validity is a formal property of arguments. And we're going to say that some arguments are valid and some aren't. Some have this property and some don't. And so the relation then between the premises and the conclusions of a valid argument are what we call entailment. So entailment is a relationship that holds between the premises and the conclusions in valid arguments. So in a valid argument, a conclusion is entailed by its premises. So for a sentence to be entailed by another sentence then means that it logically follows from the premise, from that sentence. And an argument we're going to say is valid if its conclusion is entailed by or logically follows from its premises. So what it means exactly for one statement to logically follow from or be entailed by other sentences is a difficult problem. We'll look more at this in the next couple of modules. But for now, really the key is that this core feature, if an argument is valid, then we know that if the premises of the argument are true, then the conclusion must be true. So as we've already seen, a valid argument and a sound argument are different. So a false conclusion can follow validly from false premises, right? So there can be valid but unsound arguments. So once again, a false conclusion can follow validly from false premises. So an entailment relation can hold between false premises and a false conclusion. Similarly, interestingly, a true conclusion can follow validly from false premises. So a true conclusion can be entailed by false premises. And then there are also cases, of course, where the conclusion of an invalid argument is true. So you can have a really lousy argument for a true conclusion. However, and here's the critical point, it's never going to be the case that false conclusions follow validly from true premises. Okay, so that's one thing you can certainly count on. So let's look a little bit at, what form has to do with validity. And so what we're going to do is we'll take a look at some cases of bad arguments, and we'll look at the form of the bad argument. So the first premise to this bad argument is that Mabel is opposed to labor unions, nationalizing healthcare, and government-funded public education. Right? So this is something about Mabel that we know. The second thing we know is that followers of Ayn Rand are opposed to labor unions, nationalized healthcare, and government-funded public education. So she shares a characteristic with followers of Ayn Rand. And we conclude from that, mistakenly, that Mabel must be a follower of Ayn Rand. So the strong association between the characteristics of followers of Ayn Rand and the characteristic that Mabel exhibits leads us to incorrectly conclude that Mabel must be a follower of Ayn Rand. So let's go through the argument and sort of strip away the formal features, take a look at the form of the argument. First thing we'll do is, for the purposes of getting at the form, we'll look at an analogous argument, an argument with the same form, that's a little bit easier to see as being obviously wrong. But before we do that, let's take a look at why the argument is wrong, why the argument's a bad argument. And here, what we've got is, well, we know the argument is bad because if we deny the conclusion, then we're not contradicting any of the premises. So the premises are compatible or consistent with the denial of the conclusion. So here, premises are consistent with the denial of the conclusion. So denying that she's a follower of Ayn Rand doesn't contradict any of the premises of the argument. So given what the premises tell us, it might not be the case that she is a follower of Ayn Rand. She might be, but she might not be too. And if the conclusion genuinely followed logically from the premises, then we'd know with absolute certainty, given the truth of the premises, that she must be a follower of Ayn Rand. So here, the counterexample is the negation of the conclusion. So if we negated the conclusion, we'll find that it's consistent with the assertion of the premises. And if there is a counterexample of that kind, then we know that the proffered conclusion doesn't follow. So even though there might be something plausible about the line of reasoning that someone exhibited when they said, well, Mabel's like this and followers of Ayn Rand are like this, so Mabel must be a follower of Ayn Rand. Even though there seems to be something intuitively plausible about that, it's actually a lousy piece of reasoning. So here's a formally equivalent argument. And we'll look at one more. We'll just quickly go along with that. So with the exception of 2, all prime numbers are odd. This is true, right? So prime numbers are odd except for 2. 15 is odd. So then we'll conclude 15 is a prime number. Now a prime number, of course, is a number that, whose, what do we say? A number that's only divisible by itself and 1. But 15, of course, is divisible by 5 and 3, not just itself and 1. So there's something that's gone wrong here. We've obviously made a mistake. So if we say all prime numbers are odd, 15 is odd, so 15 is a prime number, there's something wrong here. And we'll recognize that this is the same kind of situation that we had in the case of Mabel. So Mabel is blah, blah, blah. Followers of Ayn Rand are blah, blah, blah. So Mabel must be a follower of Ayn Rand. All prime numbers are odd. 15 is odd. So 15 is a prime number. That's a formally equivalent version. I guess what it would go like this. So we'd have 15 is odd is like Mabel has these political positions. All followers of Ayn Rand have these political positions. Therefore, Mabel is a follower of Ayn Rand. So I guess the idea would be that those two premises would be flipped, and then it would be formally equivalent. So what do I mean by that? Well, here we've got Mabel believes A, Ayn Rand followers believe A, therefore Mabel is an Ayn Rand follower. Okay, we see that doesn't hold. Even more obviously, here's a case. So Sally's a human. All dentists are human. Therefore, Sally is a dentist. And I hope that's obvious to you that that's a lousy piece of reasoning. Okay, so let's look at the sort of in its most bare bones form what these things look like. So here we have, all triangles are blah blahs, rectangles, circles are rectangles, therefore a circle is a triangle. Now, what am I doing here? Well, I'm not talking about circles and triangles. The circles, the triangles, and the rectangle here are placeholders for propositions. So you could imagine inserting any content in here any content in here, and then you'd have what you can see here is that these shapes are supposed to be like stand-ins for propositions, and we just maintain consistently what the propositions are throughout, and you can see the form of the argument. So, for example, let's say in the first case it was here all Ayn Rand followers are, believers in are against national health care, let's say. Jessica is against national health care, therefore Jessica is an Ayn Rand follower. All right, so very roughly, that's how we're going to unpack these formal characteristics. So going back to our old friend affirming the consequent, here we can just eliminate all of the content, look just at the form, and this in bare bones is what the form of the argument looks like. So if star, then happy face, therefore star. So clearly there's a problem with that, as we've seen.